non-violently. My father was not a supporter of violence to gain change. So I grew up knowing a lot about these orders, and I don't implicate them all, but I would certainly have to look at Sir Roger Casement, Eamon de Valera, Thomas Luby, and many other characters. If people go to my Irish Origins article on the Michael Tsarion website, all the information is there. The DVD will be coming out. And basically, this order was infiltrated by Jesuits, and by the way, even by the Knights of Malta, which again, on the surface is a so-called Catholic organization. But I hesitate to say this because, you see, there's a big difference between even the Catholic Protestant thing as a smokescreen put in front of us. When you're behind the lodge door, none of these religious divisions mean a damn thing. So the Protestant Queen of England can be the head of the Knights of Garter and the heads of what's called the Knights of St. John, but behind the door, they're all the same as the Knights of Malta, and the Knights of Columbus, and the Knights of Rhodes, and the Knights Templar. They're all one organization. They just create a front of looking like, oh no, these guys are Catholic, they're Protestant, therefore they must have no connection. For goodness sake, the man who was the 70s, I think it was the 72nd head, he just died recently, right? Bertie, was the cousin of the Queen of England. He's meant to be the head of the Catholic Knights of Malta, whose headquarters is in Rome, but he's cousin to the Queen of England, who's the head of the Knights of St. John. The symbolism is exactly the same. This is what I mean. They understood that legitimate, after the famine, they understood that legitimate Republican orders amongst the Irish, they were done. They were done, and they were going to rebel. And they were going to get help. Legitimate help from France. If you study the life of Robert Emmet, the great revolutionary hero of Ireland, who waited down in Cork, waited for the French army, and they never arrived. History tells you that a wind happened to blow their armada, and so they never arrived. Yeah, disasters like this is because they understood that a Robert Emmet would arise. They understood that a Michael Collins will arise. They understood that these freedom fighters are going to take Ireland back. And just like the old ploy that they've done century after century, which is why I say if people would study this, they'd get it.
Yeah, absolutely. While we're on the topic of Ireland, there's another relevant question. The Irish language is in decline, and do you think there's an agenda behind that? Because obviously the spoken word, as a lot of us know in this area, that if you want to get into the realm of sound, vibration, the nature of reality, casting spells, what's your opinion on that? And then we'll bring in a caller for another question.
Well, just like Professor Tolkien showed, the language of a people is the soul of that people. That's how one man communicates his thoughts and ideas to another man. And that's how a priestly sect who has the welfare of the tribe in mind communicates from the divine level to the human level. And the one that this interfering with language or suppressing of language is another worldwide, global, colonizing, imperialistic process. It didn't just happen in Ireland. But people have to realize it's two-pronged attack. There is the suppression. There's the outright suppression and prohibition against those idioms, those tropes, and also then those religious motifs that come with the ancient Aboriginal people that you're suppressing. But then people have to also realize there's the co-opting of those very tropes and motifs. For instance, in Ireland today, it is the Catholic Church that many orders, like there's a group called the Christian Brothers. They're Catholic. Look them up on Wikipedia. The Christian Brothers are noted for their preservation of Gaelic. This is a Catholic monastic order that's charitable and allows and very much focuses on the keeping of the traditions of Ireland and the keeping of the language of Ireland. So people will point to you and go, Michael, you're wrong. You see, here's a Catholic organization that very much loves the fact that Gaelic should be spoken and so on. So you've got to understand, it's the same thing going back to the Druids. You couldn't have the Romans and you couldn't have the British establishment today without the co-opting of all the previous Druidic knowledge. You wouldn't have Merovingians, you wouldn't have Knights Templars, you wouldn't have a Vatican. The popes of Rome were situated in the 13th century in France. They weren't even in Rome. They had to leave. It's after they plagiarized all the Western traditions that they finally were able to build their architecture and use all these pagan motifs. And that happened then, and it happens later on. So there's a suppression, and then there's a removal of the hardcore, the people who just won't back down. That happened on the Isle of Anglesey, where the women and the men, the Druids who won't roll over, well, you got to slaughter them. Everybody else will fall in line once the hardcore are gone, right? Get rid of the James Connollys. Get rid of the Michael Collins. Shoot them down the moment that they start to find the truth. The moment that they themselves, some of these men start to twig the fact that there's something really weird going on here. I think our own our own organization is infiltrated. I'm going to go and do something about it. You won't go 2 feet.
Yeah.
History is littered with the deaths of great men, the graves of men who started, in fact, I believe that Malcolm X was one of these people, just on the cusp of their own insight to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
They get hacked down from insiders because, oh my God, he was great when he was a pawn on our chessboard, but now he's begun to think. We can't have that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Che Guevara.
You're right. I agree.
Che Guevara is another good example. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, let's try and bring a caller in. Let's have a look. Our very own Mark Cocking. Are you there, Mark?
I think I am, Mike, but I'm also hearing the 30-second delay, so the conversation has been completely mixed.
You're on live with me right now, so if you've got any other windows open, such as the radio show or a chat room, if you can close those ones down, then you can just have this conversation with me, and obviously fire your question away to Michael, or have some input, whichever.
Okay. Right, yeah, sorry about that, obviously technical issues here. It's a bit hard to jump in. I think I might have got lost off in the last 10 minutes there, but something that interests me is this duality throughout history, and I'm wondering what you might think about it. You talked about Blavatsky being a good person, and I personally agree, and the theosophical principles being hijacked, infiltrated. And I've found this mirrored with Thoth, or Hermes, who history shows was a pacifist, and yet the very principles, the hermetic principles that spring from that, have been abused. And the pagan religion you were talking about, Druids in particular, Wicca, other such things. Do you feel that in some way that's been infiltrated? Because the one point I'd like to make on this is that Wicca and other such pagan principles dictate that you draw down the energy of the moon and you convert that and put it out positively. And yet I find that the New Age worships the pagan goddess. Again, this duality of a principle being reversed. Now, do you have any thoughts yourself on that, particularly with this Thoth character?
Thoth is nothing more than a version of the forest god Herne.
Yeah.
Right, because the Greeks had him as Hermes, and Nikor, Cernunnos. It's a prototype of Herne, which is the hunter. And all the great heroes of the world, I don't care if it's Gilgamesh or Samson wearing the lion's pelt, they're all hunters. There's a hunter motif in all the heroes. You find it in Zeus, you find it in a lot of these things. Why so recurrent? Why do the Egyptian gods have animal heads to begin with? What is the connection with all of that? It's because, you see, what Christians have failed to understand about paganism is that it's nothing remotely to do with evil. Evil is merely the twisting of something that was originally good, and like you say, either hijacking it, cannibalizing it, and twisting it from its original intent. That's what evil is. These subjects are not evil at all. They are theologies. My goodness, as I said, talking about hijacking, Christianity is the hijacking of this duality. They took all of these idioms, they turned female goddesses into gods, they turned gods into goddesses. Right? This goes with Asherah. Yeah. Did you know that Asherah was the consort of Yahweh, but you'll never hear about that? You know, so they skew and turn, and then of course we have the whole movement from the matriarchal interpretation of reality into a forced and deliberate, and you find this in the Bible, the patriotism. You find an actual rewriting of certain passages and rescripting of certain figures, like Sarah, the wife of Abraham, and others, and certainly Mary Magdalene in the New Testament. The absolute rescripting of these people as whores, harlots, fallen women, etc., because that's the patriarchal coloring and complexion coming in. That one is another one to factor in as well. But speaking specifically about what you're talking about, it really ties into the idea that in all these pre-traumatic theologies, before the trauma, because if you're talking duality, you're talking ego. Because it's only with the advent of the ego and the splitting, right brain, left brain, everything different, man being separate from the world, man's body being separate from his mind, God being separate from the world. All these dualities come about after this fracturing, which I believe was caused largely by earth cataclysm. Then you have these dualities, and as I've said in other programs, if you buy into one duality, my God, that just unravels and becomes umpteen more dualities. But in the pre-dualistic time, did you know that the Egyptians didn't even have a word for dualism? They didn't even know what that was. In the time before the dualism set in, then at that point, it was understood by the priestarchy of those eras that when you're teaching a man to understand his self, that came with an understanding of nature, because in their tradition, nature was the self, or shall we say, an extension of the self. Now this is where the Christians fall off, because the moment that you start talking about nature and the moon and the power of the sun and the power of the stars and the power of herbs, they lose it because they think that's paganism. What they don't understand is, before this misinterpretation of these evil arcs that we're talking about, the very ones dressed up to the nines, by the way, in that pagan symbolism, let's add that. But before their interference, to discover who you were as a person, it implied, it was coterminous with an understanding of nature. In the same way that in order to discover an instrument, how to play it with your hands, you have to understand about wood and strings and vibration and music and all of these other things. They had no division between all of these things. So they would initiate you by beginning your journey in some kind of rituals that involved nature. To emphasize this point, that is why Hern and all the ancient gods, Cernunnos, Kron, and the Egyptian gods were always shown with animal heads. The very word neter is the Egyptian word for God, means nature. It's where we get words like neuter and enter and nature from. It's because nature was you, you were nature. In the time of the splitting, in the time of the bicameral mind, these two realities split. There's been various teachers from philosophy to science to all sorts of whatever have tried to reconcile these things, and with various levels of success. Then you're talking about the New Age movement. Have they done a good job? No, they haven't. Number one, their movement is entirely infiltrated by Luciferians, by atomists, by solar cult individuals who need to attract you with the promise of hidden power, just in the same way that the Masons do. Because they know that inside your archetypal brain, inside that ancestral mind, you do remember all of these motifs. So they lure you, carrot and stick. They know that people are dropping off from the official religions, so they lure you with this stuff only to get you back into another form of collectivism, another form of primitive tribalism, another form of, it's just another doorway to the whole hive mentality. It's got nothing to do with what the ancient shaman and druids were talking about, which was differentiation, splitting from the horde, defining your individuality from the mass, discovering who you really are. The only difference is that in those days, this was connected to the natural mysteries of life. That's why watching what the animals did, developing your own personal, and I mean personal, not collective, relationship with fire, water, air, and earth. Each individual going through those experiences. This is why you see the hero carrying his dead brother across the water, right? Why you see the man on horseback crossing the desert. You see all these motifs that you find in movies. You're talking about the fool motif. Watch the movies Crocodile Dundee 1 and 2. Then pull out the tarot card and look at the symbolism. Yeah. Go and watch the Clint Eastwood movies. Go and watch Dune. I don't know if it's conscious. We can argue that point, or it's accidental, or it's unconscious. But there it is, nevertheless. In great art is drawing from this archive. What the modern controllers want to do is lead you away from the true archive where all of this wisdom is. But how can they do that without luring you? You see, they found it difficult to do that. To get people to divorce themselves from the true Hermetic archive is not easy, because it's like an elastic band. No matter how time you pull and lure people away, something happens where they go back. So they found that the best way to do it is to create a faux version. And all that glitters is not gold. We'll give you a bunch of peach pits and hopefully they'll turn into diamonds. And we bought it. We're mistaking sugar for salt just because they look alike. And they've done wonders with this. Right? The monkey is running for the sticky sweets because he doesn't understand what's been going on. They're leading you, Pied Pipering you with the smoke screen of these sacred mysteries and traditions. And they've got incredibly conniving ways of doing this. And by the way, this goes for all them Eastern yogas and Eastern mystical so-called paths, including most of those, and certainly all the churches and everything else in the New Age movement. They have created a faux, holographic, virtual imagery of that which is sorely desired, you see. Even the movies do this. Television programs are filled with a sacred symbolism for that purpose. What you don't realize is by you reaching out for that, thinking that that's the real thing, you're actually being further and further divorced and further removed from the real core principles